Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Pieter. I'm the CTO of THEO Technologies, and I actually wanted to discuss some new opportunities with streaming protocols that we're working on. Okay. Oh, I think it's back on this one as well. I'll put it here if I need it. But I wanted to discuss some possibilities around streaming protocols that our team has been working on. Okay. Yes? No? Okay, I'll switch to this one. Why have we been working on this? We've seen in the industry that a lot of people are struggling with all kinds of different problems. And they're trying to patch those problems, but they're not trying to find an actual solution for it. And it's interesting, because in the past, there weren't that many problems with video delivery. It was rather simple. Everybody had one device. It was usually located in their living room, and content was being distributed there on a controlled network. Only linear, no VOD. But of course, OTT changed that. And with OTT, multiple devices needed to be reached on multiple different networks, which introduced adaptive streaming protocols, which were very, very interesting, but they caused a number of problems in regards to things like latencies and zapping times. Because if you look at it, it's something that came up last year rather intensively during some big sports events, that experiences from viewers are being spoiled by tweets coming in, announcing events that you didn't even see on your screen yet. High latencies mean that you don't have real interactivity, like it was also mentioned in Oliver's talk, which just happened before this talk. And that's just one part. There's also, of course, zapping, which has become quite horrible with adaptive streaming. Where if you zap, you have to wait multiple seconds before something even happens on your screen other than a loading spinner. And personally, I don't really like watching loading spinners. I don't really know people who do like watching them. But if you compare this, for example, with traditional broadcast, it used to be like a few milliseconds, hundreds of milliseconds, and then your channel would just start and you would be watching. There's one thing which is still an advantage when you look at, for example, the Netflix Fortnite announcement from a while back, where they see them as a competitor, that game loading times are still significantly higher. But that's, of course, not a good argument to not try to improve your zapping times. And of course, other than that, you also have the huge bandwidth costs, which are associated with streaming these days. Everybody is trying to improve their quality, going to HDR, 4K, higher frame rates, or trying to patch the latency problem by reducing segments and reducing GOP sizes. But all of that is actually adding additional bandwidth overhead. So these patching solutions aren't really working out in the way that you would want them to work out. And of course, there are solutions like different codecs which are available, but that usually incurs another cost because you have to swap out your entire encoder farm. And of course, they usually don't work on all the devices yet, so you have to start using multiple encodes to actually reach all devices. And of course, the other big problem in OTT is scale. You can probably solve any of these problems rather easily if you throw enough money at it. But if you try to combine all of those problems, it really becomes a very, very big pain. And that's why we started to investigate, can we do this in a more efficient way? Can we develop something which would be what we then called a high-efficiency streaming protocol? So what have we been working on? We wanted to do something which was significantly better than any other streaming protocol which is out there today, comparing to adaptive streaming protocols, but also to WebRTC, WebSocket-based approaches, or even CMAF CTE. Aiming for real ultra-low latency to allow for real-time interactivity almost, but also aiming to reduce all of that bandwidth overhead that has been introduced over the last years, while still scaling over standard HTTP CDNs to allow you to scale in a cost-efficient way. And of course, as also mentioned on the previous slides, nobody likes long loading spinners. People want a good viewer experience because that's what sets services apart. So really looking at instant zapping times, making sure that you can have a consistent playback across all of the different devices, and still having that ABR kind of functionality to be able to deliver on unmanaged networks. And now it will become a slightly more technical slide, but what it basically comes down to is we only wanted to focus on two parts of the chain, being the packager and the player. Why? We wanted it to be compatible with standard CDNs, with standard encoders, with all kinds of other components within a standard distribution stack, but still offer streaming over HTTP using HTTP 1.1 is what we went for, and having full ABR support to reach all of those devices. And we actually did some tests comparing the approach we were investigating with CMAF. We set up a fairly standard pipeline for CMAF using the Streamline open source project, which is a low latency project using FFmpeg, using Dash.js, running in an optimized low latency mode. And in parallel, we put our high efficiency streaming protocol packager, and of course, comparing a number of different CMAF configurations, 1 second segments, 2 second segments, 6 second segments, with different chunk sizes ranging from 1 to 5 different frames per chunk. And actually, the results were quite interesting. Why? What we actually noticed was that while CMAF has a lot lower latency compared to standard HLS and standard Dash, we could actually cut down that latency significantly more, going to really sub-second, only a few hundred milliseconds. And of course, we also had our bandwidth target, but after seeing these numbers, we actually ran 2 tests on bandwidth. One test was fairly straightforward. We just had the encode run with this 330 milliseconds of latency. And when comparing it, and these numbers, by the way, are for the Meridian Netflix test asset. When comparing it with the different CMAF configurations, we actually noticed that we could get almost a 15% improvement in bandwidth depending on CMAF configurations. But in the second bandwidth test, what we actually did, because let's be honest, most use cases don't really need a 330 millisecond latency. What we actually did in a second test was we reconfigured our encoder so that it had a look-ahead buffer and it could take slightly more time to do its encode. And that actually allowed us to tweak those bandwidth savings and push them even further to reach almost 20% of bandwidth savings. And trust me when I say we are not encoding experts, so I'm pretty sure that encoding experts can leverage that additional time a lot more efficient than we could. But these numbers were already very promising for us. And then a final thing which we investigated was the zapping times, which is also something which we find very interesting to have a good quality of experience. And there we noticed that regardless of the device, we could actually get that stream to start up in below 100 milliseconds, which is, of course, amazingly fast compared to multiple seconds sometimes when looking at CMAF. So that was a pretty interesting case. So we started comparing with a number of other solutions as well. And of course, yes, this image is a little bit rigged because all the entries on the left-hand side are the things that we find very important and the things that we focused on for this protocol. But I think the more important message with this image is, yes, for all of these protocols, you can try to achieve ultra-low latency. If you want ultra-low latency, yes, you can use something like WebRTC, or you could go back to RTMP. But you will be compensating this with something else. It might be that if you want ultra-low latency, that you're increasing your bandwidth usage or you're increasing your zapping times. Other things like scalability. WebRTC can do very low latency, but it doesn't scale as well as some other protocols like standard adaptive streaming protocols. And taking all of these things in one big combination, that's what we're aiming for with this streaming protocol. So not just trying to patch one of the problems that operators are seeing within their stacks, but really targeting all of the core problems which we're seeing today, so that we can basically get to this, so that we can get to sub-second latency to really make sure that our customers can offer real-time interactivity on their streams, that their viewer experiences are no longer spoiled by tweets or by neighbors cheering or something else happening in their environment before they can actually see it on their screen, but also to make sure that the people using these kind of protocols, that they can save money on their bandwidth which is being spent, or that they can reinvest certain things to make sure that they can up the quality. But also to make sure that with this one protocol, we can really reach all of the different devices. And when I say all devices, by the way, that also includes iOS Safari, for example, which is a notably horrible platform to get low latency streaming to. And of course, other than that, also making sure that we can really scale this, make it work in standard pipelines, just replacing the packager, working together with any encoder, any type of CDN, and of course, improving that user experience, making sure that those sapping times really go down, and that we get full ABR experience across all the different platforms. That's about it. I went a little bit faster than I originally anticipated, but I assume that that's fine. If you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer them. And as you might have noticed from my slides, yellow is more or less the color that we use to brand. And that big yellow block over there is actually the boot. So you will be able to find me pretty easily there, or anyone else at the booth. We actually have a few demos out there as well, comparing this protocol, or at least the prototype of this protocol, with CMAF, showing some of the bandwidth savings that we've seen. And well, a lot more interesting things to come probably in the near future. Our goal is to currently, well, we're doing some proof of concepts already with some technology partners, but we will be developing this, this further in the following months, and hopefully rolling it out to a number of clients relatively soon. So thank you, and if you have any questions, the big yellow block, that's where you'll be able to find me.